Welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm dedicated to helping you take control of your life. Together, we'll explore practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Making small changes is possible and can lead to big results. Are you ready? Let's go do this. Hey, Lawrence. Welcome back on the podcast again. I'm so excited for our conversation because I just love talking to you because we never know where we're going to go with it, do we?
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I feel like when I listened to us talk last time, I was speaking a bit quickly, so I'm going to try to slow down.
Oh, no, I think you're perfect. It's all good.
well,
So a
well,
lot of
so
movement in life. So I'm going to let you ask the question because I think you have something on your mind, and let's go roll with it.
well, before we even start, congratulations on publishing your book. I know
Thank
we
you.
both published one this year,
Hmm.
and I don't know how you felt, but I really felt like I had my book was about finance and investing in real estate, but I've always had the opinion that if you don't talk about yourself and your personal stories, it doesn't resonate as well. And I remember when I was going to Toastmasters a couple of years ago, that was the one thing I picked up was you can talk at an audience and they might listen to you and they might resonate or they might be daydreaming. But if you start a talk with, have you ever wondered why every time you go to the grocery store, you're struggling to pay your groceries because, inflation is all around us? Then it engage people are thinking, yeah, that's true. When I go to the grocery store. So they always say when you do a speech in Toastmasters, you should always try to engage the audience to make them think about themselves. So when I wrote my book, I had my personal story about when I made all this money in my 20s and I made all these mistakes and I pretty much lost it all or spent it all. And then I rebuilt and I found the real estate as an investment tool. And so I put all these personal stories in there. And I remember it was very difficult for me because I'm a natural introvert to put the book out there. And then these random people, like the most random people have messaged me like, hey, I really enjoyed your book. And the first thought I think is, oh my goodness, they know all this personal stuff about me now. So I don't know, because
Right.
you did the same thing. You had all these
I
personal
did.
stories and you talked about your growth and you talked about for years, thinking about suicide and all these really
Yeah.
personal things. And we put it out there and then you send it out almost like a podcast. You send out the recording and then you never know who's going to listen to it down the road. And so I found that was a big challenge for me. And I don't know if you had that same challenge.
Yeah, there's so much truth there. I don't know. How long has your book been out?
It's been about four months, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay. So mine just came out and last week. So I'm still brand new. There's no real feedback. I mean, I do have a couple Amazon reviews, but the same thing, I wrote an autobiographical self-help book is how
Mm,
I classify it, where I took my stories and I took my stories, my challenges and everything in it and said, "Okay, what did I learn out of walking through these particular what I would classify as traumas, but other people
mm,
might not, but that's what I call them, traumas and challenges." And, there's something really, like you said, it makes you vulnerable when you write a book that has personal stories in it. And I think it hit me after the ebook came out last week. And I went, "Oh, wow, okay, my life is now out there."
yes.
My personal stories are now out there, but the drive for the book was just to help one person. It was like if
Mm,
somebody's life is affected in some capacity, if one person out there, then it was all worth it, you know?
mm,
So, yeah, there's just something about it. I haven't gotten the random texts yet, but I'm not it's just so new. But, yeah, there's something very vulnerable about writing a book, but it makes it more personable. I agree with you. I mean, there's
mm,
something about it where when you infuse yourself into the story, then people can really relate better rather
mm.
than, just reading something and not being able to engage the writer. So, did you find what was the biggest takeaway you found from writing your book?
I think it's when you clarify your thoughts, then you like one of my favorite sayings is actually in one of the quotes behind me is by Soren Kierkegaard, and it said, "Life must be lived forward, but it can only be understood when we look back." And he actually wrote that in
Mm,
his private journal, and somehow his journals were published after his death, and it became this it's one of my favorite quotes because I think it really explains life. So when we're at the absolute bottom, you and I have both been there where, we've been really just so negative and down about our life. And if someone tells you at that time, hey, listen, I know you can't imagine this, and I know you feel like the world is closing around you and you can't see a reason to live. But maybe in 10 years, you'll look back at this, and because it'll force you to grow and change and adapt, it might be the best thing to ever happen to you. But you can only see that 10 years down the road. And I really, truly believe that. I think I'm so much happier now than I was. And I always think if I had just been with all my financial problems, I've been up and down several times now. And I think if I had just put $1,000 in Bitcoin 15 years ago and I was worth 100 million from Bitcoin, I promise you I wouldn't be as happy as I am now, because I'd probably be, I wouldn't have my family. I'd probably be chasing the wrong kind of girls and living a playboy life that will be very unfulfilling in the long term, very, hedonistic fun that gets bored very quickly. And I always think about that. I think I'm so grateful for all the hardships. And I think that just sharing that in a story is really, really powerful. And you mentioned something. You said the vulnerability when you write about, your failures and the mistakes you make in life. I think that's so important because firstly, no one can resonate with someone who came out wealthy parents, everything they touched turned to gold. They met the perfect wife, perfect family, perfect job, perfect career, never had a problem in their life. We can't relate to that. Whereas I've had many people, when I share some of the stories I've been through, where I made all this money and then I lost it and spent it. And then the second time that I've talked about a bit, but I haven't talked about too much because I'm still kind of going through it, is I had this contractor screw me over, and it all kind of came to a head when the world shut down during COVID. It was that crazy time, and the banks kind of pulled all these loans, and I got sucked into this whole nightmare of his. And I'm still dealing with, there's been 3 lawsuits since then, and I'm getting dragged in because of his mistakes. And I was technically partners with him because I co-signed on some loans with him in 2020 because I was trying to be a team player and all these different things. And when I talk about it, it's been so interesting. I've had so many people reach out and say, I've got ripped off by this person a few years ago, and it's so nice to hear you talk about it. And I'm blown away about the number of people that have shared that story. But they wouldn't have shared it if I said, hey, look at me, I've never had any problems and life's great. And I'm this wealthy guy that never had any issues. So I just think you really resonate with people. And I think it's really nice. I always tell people, if I'm having a tough time, say in business, we use business as an example. If I'm having a tough time in business because interest rates went up, and I hear another broker friend of mine who's so successful, and he said, man, Lawrence, I've had such a tough year, with these rates, and I've had all these deals fall through, and I wasn't planning for it financially. I always tell them, I'm so sorry to hear that, but it's refreshing to know that it's not just me that's going through challenges. It's this environment. So anyone associated with interest rates are having that same challenge. So I always think I never want to be the person that is joyful when other people go through hardships. I always want to be the person who gets inspired by greatness, and I want to use it to elevate me. But sometimes it's refreshing to hear people going through struggles when you're also going through struggles, and then you feel like you're not alone, and you don't take it personally. So I think that's something that both of us are good at doing, is sharing our vulnerabilities. And I don't think there's one person that I look up to that doesn't share their vulnerabilities. Like those smooth talking politicians that never ever take accountability for anything they've done. No one likes them, really. You might like them because you dislike the other side more, but we all know what they're like. They're just these actors, these kind of plastic people. They're not real. So I think that's really nice. People, So when I was reading your book, you were nice enough to send me an early draft, and when I read it, that's the approach I got. It made me like you more because you're sharing that. So I think that's it's been a really good lesson for me. Last thing I'll say on this is, as a dad, I realized that if I had never had hardships, what kind of dad would I be? How can I tell my son when he goes through hardships, But if you've had difficulties in life, then I can be a good guide, and I can tell him it's okay. You're going to go through things. We all know you're the same with your kids. You all know that, our kids, they're going to have their heart broken. That's inevitable, right? It's going to happen once, twice, 3 times. We've all been there when we were young. So, that's inevitable. But if my son gets in a lawsuit, I got in my first lawsuit when I was 42, and one of my friends said, you got to 42 without having a lawsuit? You must be very lucky. And now, so now, exactly. So I just feel like
I'm 53 and I haven't been in one.
So congratulations. It's horrible.
Well, yeah, I know. Well, I'm not dead yet, so we got a lot of life.
Never say never.
Right, never say never, right? I think one thing you said that I wanted to pull out was the word perfect. And we get so hung up in our I mean, I feel like we get so hung up on perfectionism. And you people will scroll through Facebook, "Oh, look at that life. They have a perfect life." Where you see it in the media or you see it in other outlets, or even you compare yourself to somebody else and you say, "Oh, they have the perfect life. They got a great car, they got a great house, they got a great this, great that." And when we realize that perfectionism is something that is unattainable, you can
Mm,
strive to be a better version of yourself, which if you want to label that as chasing perfectionism, okay, that's fine. But what I want to tie in is you mentioned this perfect, right? And then with hardships. So when we set ourselves up for a perfect world, and then the hardships happen, then you go into this spiral, say, "Oh, I wanted that perfect world that I had, and now I don't have it, and now I've got this hardship, and now I need to get back to perfect." Like perfect is some normal that you have to
yes.
achieve. And what both of us have come to realize, and sometimes it's hard to a hard acknowledgement to get there, is that through those trials and tribulations, that's where you're really refined. That's where you actually have the opportunity to grow and to get closer to that perfect that you're looking for.
Mm.
If you think about it, like it's like, "Oh, wait a minute, this trial that came my way, this hardship, this lawsuit, this breakup, this heartache, this accident, whatever it is an opportunity to refine who you are as a person in order to get closer to that perfect that you're looking for." I think sometimes if we
Well,
just switch it around a little bit, maybe that's take those trials and tribulations and turn them into triumph.
one thing I love, there's an old jujitsu saying by one of the jujitsu grandmasters, Carlos Gracie, and he said, "When you compete, you either win or you learn." And I love that because
Mhm.
that gives a complete positive experience. Like either you win
Sure.
and it justifies the
Yeah,
preparation you
winners
did
are
is right,
learners.
yeah, or you
Absolutely.
learn. And I just think that's such a good mindset. It's kind of like a stoic mindset
Oh,
that we're
yeah,
going to
absolutely.
encounter trouble, but that lovely book, "The Obstacle is the Way," because the obstacle forces you to grow. I really like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I've heard that before too. When you either win or you learn, and winners are learners. That's how I turn it around. And yeah, I mean, you just it's funny how we go through life and sometimes there are those little mantras that we repeat to ourselves that help us in times when things are challenging. And one of mine, when you said the winners are learners, and one of mine is we are either winning or learning, and learners or winners. The other is obstacles make me stronger. And when I look at the challenges that I have in front of me, instead of going, "Okay, I don't want this happening to me," I'm like, "Wait a minute, this is making me stronger in the midst of whatever it is that I'm walking through." And in my book, I mean, that's one of the things that I tried to pull out as well, was just, it was that, if I can take all my challenges and traumas, which a lot of them to me seemed to be just not really that traumatic, but just normal, you know,
Right.
and maybe not, maybe to somebody else it's not, but to me, I wrote the book because it was more normal. It wasn't crazy. It wasn't a David Goggins kind of, he had a horrific childhood from what I understand. A lot of people do. I don't come from that I don't come from that background. But nonetheless, taking those challenges and saying, "Okay, if you're just an average person, it's okay to go through those things, but you can take the ordinary and make it extraordinary."
Mm. Well,
And
that's one thing I've really come to appreciate is before I met my wife, she's a therapist, and before I met her, I really thought that therapy was for weak people, and I was a winner in life,
mm,
and I didn't need therapy. And then I realized that, well, what is really good therapy? Therapy is just understanding yourself better. And she's given
mm,
me subtle therapy since the last 8 years since we've been dating, and she's helped me see certain things and realize certain things. Because a good therapist doesn't say, "Hey, it's so obvious when you talk to people that are going through problems. When you're on the outside, it's so obvious to be like, well, I can see my friends just in these, maybe it's a horrible relationship. You just think, my God, just get rid of her. She's toxic, and you're always fighting, or like just always complaining about something. But well, you go out drinking 5 times a week, maybe cut down the drinking. It's so easy when you're on the outside to see the
Yes.
problems. But
Yes.
so she always says like it's so hard for her because she can't tell people, hey Sue, your biggest problem is XYZ. It has to come from them, otherwise you're not going to make the change.
Mhm.
So she has to help. A good therapist will make you realize, or make you see certain things about yourself or the situations you're in, or the lifestyle you're living. And so I think going back to when you analyze things and you write them down. So one thing that I really got was I was writing about when I left trading. So I made all this money and I took basically a sabbatical to pursue fighting, and that was my passion. And I remember when I went to tell when you're trading, you have a backer that backs you, and then you split the profits with him 50-50. And I had this lovely backer. He was this really old man, and he had been through some incredible things. He'd really had one of those just incredible long lives. Like um, I think he was born during the Depression, just after 1929, and he's had all these incredible stories. And he was such a wonderful man. I didn't realize till I was writing it, when I was thinking back to 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when I told him I was leaving, and he gave me this lovely fatherly advice. And I remember when I left the office, I was like, okay, this is my new life. And my personality is, when I do something, I go all in and I just forget about the past. So when I was fighting, I completely forgot about my trading life, my friends, my mentors. And I had this, when I was writing it, I got almost tearful. It was really late at night. I remember thinking, God, I wish I'd kept in touch with him. He's probably
Mm,
passed away now. And he was such a good mentor to me. And he'd always take the extra time. He backed probably 100 traders at the time, but he always took time to pull me aside and talk to me, because he knew that my parents were in Europe, and I was at the time single. So I was like, by myself, and he felt almost like this fatherly responsibility. And and so that was this random lesson where, if I hadn't written about it, maybe I would have never had those memories triggered. And I always think that, like,
mm,
certain things can trigger memory. You can meet an old friend and you get all these memories come back. And I think, wow, if I never met him and we didn't have a dinner and reconnect, I'd probably go to my grave and I would never have remembered certain things. They would have been buried away.
mm,
But so that was just one example of just having appreciation for people that have really been good mentors to me, give me wisdom. And I vowed, after writing that and having all those emotions come, that I'm always going to maintain friendships. I've got to stop this thing where, when I change career and I pivot, I just kind of I go all in and I forget about the past. I think that's a really bad character trait. And I wish I'd
mhm.
kept in contact with him. Um, yeah.
That it's something you said about you go all in and then forget the past. You had just gone all in to go forward and had lost contact with that, with what your former life was. And I'm wondering, um, so what was the driver behind why you would forget the past or leave all that? Like, when you went from trading into fighting, what was the driver behind that? Like, or the thought process why you wouldn't want to remember where you came from to where you were going?
So I don't think it was conscious. I had this fear of being an old man, that was because at the time I was working with money and I was making all this money. And I had this fear that I'd be an old man with the monetary success around him. So I just had this picture of me as an old man, grandkids around my feet, living in a beautiful mansion somewhere, and having this big family, and everyone thinking, wow, look, Lawrence is a success. He made it. But in my heart, I'd have known that I had these dreams that I didn't do, and I would feel like a sham.
Mm,
So that's what drove me, because my friends at the time said, Lawrence, you'll never leave this. You work for yourself, you make all this money, you enjoy trading, like,
mm,
you have this idyllic life for a young man. Why would you give it all up and be a people that are fighting? They tend to do that because they don't have any choices. It's a very tough way to make a living. Um, and I don't think it was conscious that I've done this a few times in my life where I just completely forget about the past.
mm,
It's that it was so hard physically and mentally that I didn't have any other bandwidth for anything else. So
mm, mhm,
it was just that. And another thing I realized is, I was it I love this idea, Sue, of knowing what you don't know. And I think one of my big strengths in life is that I know what I don't know. And that's after I spent I think I've read on average a book a week for the last 30 years, something like that. Like,
Mm.
I've been an incredible reader and incredibly curious about a vast range of subjects. And the more I learn, the more I realize my areas of ignorance. And I think I tell people every day in business, I say, let me get back to you on that. Let me check. I think I'm very willing to say that, because I think that's a sign of I'm always looking to grow, and there's so much knowledge out there you can't possibly
Mm.
keep track of everything. And I think one of the
Mhm.
problems in the Western world with a lot of our leaders is that they they think they know everything, and they don't know what they don't know. And one of the things that, if I look back at before I met my wife, I remember thinking, because fighting was so hard for me, it was very selfish. You're training 6 days a week, 2, 3 times a day. You've got to watch your diet. You've got to be careful what you eat. So for me, in my head, I was thinking, wow, I want to do this. It's a very solitary pursuit. And I want to do this as a single man. I don't want to put my family through this, because, it's a lot for them. So I wasn't
Mhm.
even looking for anything serious with any relationships. And I think back now and I think, wow, if I had been in this situation with my wife and son, but I was just starting my professional career, I would have been so much better, because I'd have had that family behind me, the stable family behind me. My wife would be
Mm.
my biggest supporter. My son would motivate me and inspire me. So I was completely wrong on that. And so it's just so interesting as we go through life to realize all these different things. We have these perceptions of how things will be. So for
Right.
me, another one, oh, sorry, last thing I'll say is a bit, being a dad, I only associated with negative connotations, because I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to sleep very well. I'm going to have this responsibility. I
Oh,
won't have any.
yeah.
I used to prize my freedom and flexibility. I'm going to lose that. But what I didn't understand is, yeah, but I'm going to have a little buddy who's going to give me so much happiness. Like, he came up to me. I was watching there was some fights on the weekend on TV, and he came up to me and he's like, "Hey, Dad, what you doing? You watching the fights?" And I'm just like, he's like my little, and he plops down next to me. And he's got his little iPad with his pictures. And I'm sitting
Yeah.
there and I'm sat in my pajamas, and I'm the happiest guy in the world too. I'm like, I've got
Yeah.
my little
Yeah.
buddy. He's cuddling me, watching the fights. I'm like, I'm so happy.
There
But I
you
couldn't
go.
have even imagined that happiness before. So it's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
nice to realize how wrong you were about things. And I think that's one thing. If there's one thing I'd love to tell people who's listening to this is, um, be a little bit open to change. Don't be so fixed
Yeah.
in your mindset. Be open to change, because I think if you're not, you're going to miss out on so much that life has to offer. And you're going to get in needless. Like, we're such a tribal society right now. We're recording this just before the election. Everyone's got their
Right.
positions, in the sand. Yeah, oh, sorry, in concrete, like their fixed positions. And it's
Yeah,
like, just
yeah.
be a bit flexible. Like, don't be so tied to
Yeah.
certain ideologies. Always thinking, just be open to change, because I've
Yeah,
changed my
yeah.
mind on so many things.
Yeah, you made me think of surrendering to the flow of life. One of my favorite books ever is The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. I think that book, I've read quite a few over the years that have changed my perspective, changed my life. But I think that book alone, I've gone back to, and he has two other ones that kind of complement the Surrender Experiment. But really, the whole gist of it is just allowing life to flow your way without trying to manipulate it, turn it, make it the way you want it to be. I know part of my book when I was writing it, there's one chapter on regret. And I say, regret is a thief. If you let it, it will steal your life away. And as you were talking and you were saying about how, you wanted to fight as a young man and you didn't want to have that family, because of these things, but now you might have been a better fighter if you had the family and whatever. And I think we play that game with ourselves where we say, well, if I did this, if I did X instead of Y, then I would have been better off. Well, you don't know, right? There's just no way of being able to tell. And I think living in that land of regret, or at least being mindful of it and being careful, because it will, if you let it, it is going to steal your thoughts. I mean, if you think about it, if you dwell on it long enough, it'll just sit there with you, and you'll start daydreaming and, well, what if this happened instead? And what if that happened instead? And my coach reminded me from time to time. He's like, because I'll text him a thing here or there, and I text something on a regret, something maybe I might have been struggling with, and he's like, it's just wasted energy. It's wasted energy. And what I really want to pull out of what you said is that you realize, your son's sitting down next to you. He's your little buddy. You're the happiest guy in the world. You wouldn't trade it for anything. So you're allowing that life to surrender right where you are, to be right where you are in that moment, and you have no idea what would have happened if you went to be a professional fighter with a family. But you know what? It doesn't matter because always could be 1,000 scenarios for where we are right now. And I think the one thing that I've had to challenge myself about with all the change that has happened in my life in the last 4.5 months, so a lot of massive, massive change, is that no matter how hard you try to predict how you want things to go, they don't always go the way you want them to. And it's okay being okay with it. And that's where the surrender
Well,
comes in and say, "You know what? It's okay. It's okay."
well, so that idea of surrendering, I think I read the Surrender Experiment many years ago, and it's one of those books where you can. It's not just about the contents of a book; it's where you are in your life and how much it resonates. And that
Sure.
recently, I've been going back and I've been rereading a lot of books that impacted maybe 10, 15 years ago, and or sometimes a book that didn't really. And then I'll hear so many people talk about it that I'm like, I've got to reread it, and then I
Yeah.
really enjoy it the second time. So I think I have that somewhere. I'm going to look after we finish. I'm going to reread it, but that idea is it's so interesting, Sue, because when I was young, and I agree with you, I've really come around to this, but when I was young, I had the heard this beautiful saying, kids are made of rubber and magic. I had that magic where I was so driven. I was a very old soul when I was young, and I was determined to fight for the life I want, and I was just going to keep fighting through any obstacle. And now I realize that I think a much better analogy for life is you're surfing a stormy ocean, and sometimes you're going to have these incredible rides, and sometimes the waves are going to crash over you and smash you to pieces, and you're going to have to get back on your board and go again. And I think that there's the idea of trying to fight your way through life. I see a lot with very successful people in business that are in these very toxic relationships and bad marriages, because for them they want to fight to win everything. And so
Mm.
in a business or something, you're fighting to build a business. But in a relationship, you can be very uncompatible, and you can fight to try to make it work. And I've done this before in
Mm.
my past. And I had a good friend who said, with one of my ex-girlfriends, he said, Lawrence, square peg, round hole, what are you doing? And it was like, oh, he's so right. You know, you're trying to force this relationship, but you have fundamentally different values, and you're looking at different
Yeah.
things in your life. So I love the idea of surrendering a bit to life. And the problem I always had with it, and I'd love to hear your take on this, but I always had the problem of, it's like I wake up and my back's sore, my energy level's low. So I'm like, well, I'm going to surrender to being tired. So I'm not going to work out like that. I always considered that as kind of a defeatist way, as opposed to, no,
Mm.
I'm going to drive through. I'm going to be an alpha type personality. But I think you have to do both. I think you have to have your goals and your dreams and the direction you want your life. But if something crazy happens, you have to be willing to pivot. And
Well, there you go. That's it right there. Yeah. I mean, you said it, and that's what I would say. That's what I would have said is that if something is, like, when I'm talking about surrendering to the flow of life, it's not that, oh, it's not the I don't want to say the minute things, but you use the example of I'm sore this morning, so I just don't want to get up and, go exercise. So I'm just going to surrender to that. When Singer talks about it in the book, the surrender is more like instead of you trying to put a round peg in a square hole, it's basically allowing life to come at you where you are a round peg. You have a round hole in front of you and you're going to walk through it. It's more like making life fluid rather
mm,
than trying to manipulate it into what you think it should be. And he
well,
packs the book with, a ton of different examples where he wanted something to go the way he wanted, and then the universe brought somebody else in his path. And he was like, okay, I'm just going to surrender to this to see where it's going to go. But the other thing that you said, though, is that having that level of awareness of what it is that you're surrendering to, what you want, and what direction you're going in. I mean, it's, nothing in life is cut and dry, right? Like we want to put life into a box because that's what makes it easy. It makes the choices easy when you have either X or Y. But the reality is that between black and white, there's 50 shades of gray, right? So it's
yes.
like may if I surrender to this one thing, and surrender is a strong word. I mean, I think when you play with it
Mm.
on the English language, when you think of surrender, you think of like, I'm putting my hands up and that's it. I'm just gonna
Exactly.
totally cave 100%. And Singer's point to surrender was more like, okay, I'm going to allow, it's more of a flow. It's an ease and flow.
Mm.
I'm surrendering to the ease and flow of what's in front of me, as opposed to a hard stop perspective where you're caving in or you're going against what you want to do, or it's more of an energy perspective, like a positive negative energy. If you For those listening, if you believe in that positive negative energy, how that runs through, right? So that's kind of the perspective that I use anymore. It's like, okay, I know myself enough that I'm not going to do this thing because I know myself enough. It's that awareness issue.
No,
And then when you're more aware, then you're like, okay, I can surrender to wherever life is going to take me in this circumstance. And I've experienced in my job, I totally changed jobs completely. I went from financial advising to helping run a plumbing and heating company. There are lots of opportunities for me to surrender the last 5 months
you
where
know,
you just kind of let life go that way, that direction.
I'm so glad you said that. The semantics. I think that was you're right. I think there was part of me that's like surrender. It's a defeatist
Yeah,
word. I think
it is.
that I completely understand what you're saying, and just being. I think just being open to the possibilities of life. I was just earlier today. I was thinking. I was reading something, and it was talking about young people. Some kids in school when they're very young. What do you want to be when you're old? I want to be a fireman. They know what they want to be when they're very young, and I was thinking back to when I was young, and I remember when I graduated, I had no clue what I was going to do. I was actually
Me
planning
neither.
to go to Australia for a year or two. I really just wanted to. I was a hard worker. I think my first job was at 12, and I was always studying hard, working hard. I was in martial arts. I was training. I was always just pushing myself and trying to improve myself. And I was tired mentally. And I think I always had the idea that whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to work hard in my career. So before I have a family, before I get tied to a job, I just want to sit on a beach and I want to meet people. I want to grow my hair long and I just want to be a bit of a bum and a hippie for a year or two. I want to go to Australia. I'd never been to Australia, but I said I had that in my head. And then I just randomly, my uncle met someone at a party and he was telling him about me. I just graduated. And he said, Lawrence, you have to talk to these people. They're expanding company in London. They're a derivatives trading company and they
Mhm.
need people like you. Just talk to them. So in my head, I was like, well, if I work for 3 months, then I go to Australia with more money. So I went for an interview and I saw these young kids, 26, 27 years old, making hundreds of thousands of pounds. And I was like, they're not brighter than me. I can do this. So then that the 3 months turned into 10 years, or 8 years, and then I did take my sabbatical, enjoyed my life. But I'm really proud of myself that I was open to that and I wasn't
Mhm.
so fixed.
There's your
I was like,
surrender. There's your
yeah.
example of surrender. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
because
what
Sue,
that's what I'm talking about.
I worked in London, then I was in Holland for a year, then they sent me to Chicago for a summer, then New York for the winter, then back to Chicago for the summer, then I quit and set up my own company. So I was living out of suitcases for years and it was tough.
Yeah.
Had no roots. You have to keep making new friends and new social circle. And but I'm so glad that it worked out like that because I'm in Chicago now. And I always think to play that experiment is so crazy, Sue. Just before I got my job, I had applied to this program teaching English in Japan, and I think what would have happened if and I had a terrible interview. It was like she started arguing with me, the lady in the interview. It was like this just absolute nightmare. And so I ended up getting put on the reserve list. And then I got the job offer, and I was like, "Oh, screw them! If I'm on the reserve list, I'm going to take this job." But I always think it's so crazy to think, my life would be so different if I'd gone there.
Mhm.
Who knows? Maybe I
Sure.
think God, if I was stuck in London, I find London it's just too much. Like the weather's not great. The culture there is too much for me. I would be so miserable. So it's so funny that experiment, kind of going back to when you write a book, like you look back at these pivotal moments in your
Yeah.
life and you think, thank God that that I didn't go down this one route.
Yeah, I agree. What's one thing, with writing a book, what did you think would be easy but wound up being more challenging about writing a book? And then flip it, what was more challenging that you thought would be easy? And we'll wrap it up with that one because I know that that can be a tough one. Not tough, but it's a good question.
So in my head, I thought if I can just take the time, and I don't take Adderall, but I was like, I'll just pop an Adderall, and in 10 hours I'll write the whole thing. I had it in my head. And this was a month before my son was born. And I was like, I had a few like a little chapters, and I was like, okay, I think I know what to do. And then he came a month early, and then nothing happened for about 2 years, 2.5 years. And then so the hardest thing for me was just you have the idea, and it's just the laborious time of just sitting with it without distractions, because my nature of my business is I'm getting a lot of daily distractions, calls, texts, emails. And I found that was the hardest thing. And I think that's a really good lesson for me, that I need to work more on finding space in my life, because
Mm,
it's every time that I take the time to just really be away from my phone and try to just relax, all these things pop up in my head like, oh, I got to do this. I'm going to write this down before I forget it. And so I know for myself, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people that live in today's world, that making time for yourself to get more space from all the
mhm,
incoming things that we're getting bombarded with all day. That's definitely something I have to do more of. But that was the hardest thing, is just having all the responsibilities, having an idea, and just the laboriousness of getting it onto paper, getting the first draft, making all these changes. But the process itself, I enjoyed so much because of I think the same thing that you were saying, where you get to analyze yourself and you get to make these connections. And I feel like you
yeah.
understand yourself better. So the book that I'm working on now is very similar to yours. It's a book that I want to write for my son, and my top 10 lessons that I've learned through mistakes and life, just living life. And I want to give it to him on his 13th birthday. And it's kind of going to be kind of like a manual for life. And who knows if he'll
Wow.
like it or not. It might be a bit young, but I think I've been really blessed to have a few different careers. And I think between that and all the books I read and all the self study, I guess, and just thinking about what makes a good life. And I got the most beautiful compliment yesterday from an old friend. He said, it seems when I look at you that you really live in the present and you enjoy the moments every day with your son. And he's a new dad too. He's an older dad like me. And he said that's something he's really struggling with, because he's very type A. And he said, I'm always looking
Mm,
forward about what I can do. And he said, I'm really jealous of you because you seem to really live in the moment. But that's something that's taken a lot of time to do.
yeah.
But I think that would be a really wonderful thing for me to do, to give him. And it's almost like an insurance. I don't know what it is, but when I was young, I remember all the people that my parents knew, they seemed to live into old age. Maybe it was just the circle I was in or what it was, but I've lost so many people to different things, suicide,
Yeah.
opiates, accidents. I've already recorded 3 podcasts with people that aren't here anymore. And it's just
Oh,
so
wow.
tragic. And I think I want to write this as soon as I can, just in case something happens to me. It's so funny. I never used to think about this, and then as soon as you have something you love so much, you have this fear of not being there to see him grow up. So
Yeah.
I just want to have something so that if something happens to me, he'll have my words. And I know it's kind of a morbid
Yeah,
thing,
yeah, it's a
but it's
legacy thing. No, I
yes,
think it's legacy. We were talking about that. I was talking with somebody about, I don't know, I was at a family function on Saturday and they were talking about, well, if I somebody mentioned, well, if I die, there's nothing of me left over. And it really got me thinking about legacy, and about what do we leave when we leave this earth? What can we do to enrich somebody else's life while we're here?
yes,
And, y it's eh, it hit me at that moment when that person said it. I said it hit me that I wrote a book. I was like, "Oh, wow, I wrote a book." That's legacy right there. I produced a book. I have a book out there. It's out there now. This is something that I did. It's legacy. Podcast, same thing. We put this out there. Unless we pull it off, it's going to stay there as long as we leave it there. There's legacy there. And I think all of us, if you really search, we all have the capacity and ability to pass on our wisdom and pass on what we have in some form of legacy to to the world and give it to the world. And it's that it's also it's a labor of love, and it's an act of selflessness. The opposite of being selfish, selfless, to give that of yourself to others and just, put yourself out there. So I think that's beautiful that you're writing a book for your son. I think it's going to be one of those treasures that, even if at 13 he can't fully appreciate the depth of what you're going to write and what you're going to leave him, he will have that he can go back to at 15, at 20, at 30, at 45, at 50. It's something that will never disappear. So I think that's awesome.
I
I'm
love that. And
excited.
two,
I'm excited for him.
that's so sweet.
I'm
But you
excited
know
to
what's
read it
thank
because
you.
I think
You know,
all of us can learn lessons. Sorry, go ahead.
you know what's I was gonna say I heard this thing the other day, and it really resonated with me. It said, for self growth, you want to be in as many different circles as you can,
Mhm,
and I think that's so beautiful. Like you and I are in the podcast circle, and we met through podcasting and mutual friends, and
mhm.
you have this network, and then. I actually just recently just joined another Indiana local Toastmaster group because I want to
Oh,
be a
wow.
better public speaker and I want to be better at expressing my ideas. And then I have my real estate crew, my jiu-jitsu group, have my old trading friends. And I just think you want to really aim to be in as many different groups as you can because they're all going to have different ways of seeing the world and different perspectives. And I just think
Sure.
it's so important to be around those different people. So kudos to you. Like you've made so many connections through podcasting. And like you said, it is a selfless thing. You're giving people platforms to talk and you're sharing ideas. And I don't know about you, but one of the reasons I wanted to start a podcast was I got so much out of them. There were so
Mhm.
many things that I learned, or that I'm going to start doing this because I get inspired by someone else talking about it. And I think
Mhm.
it's such a beautiful thing. Like back in the 1600s, you'd go to these coffee shops, and it would be all the intellectuals of the day, and they would discuss ideas. And podcasting is like the modern equivalent of that. And we all introduce each other to people, and I just think
Yeah.
it's just wonderful,
Yeah. I've
and
met some amazing people through podcasting. Yeah. Yeah.
from all over the world. It's
Yes.
wonderful, right?
Yes, yes, it is. Yeah, I mean, I've met people I've interviewed people from New Zealand, from England. I had a doctor on from, I think he's in Norway. That was that was fascinating. I mean, we could do a whole podcast just talking about our guests and how really cool it is. But podcasting, you said what's one of the reasons you did it was for the people that you meet. I think when you do start a podcast, it challenges you to grow as a person as well. I know I'm a better speaker. I know I'm a better interviewer. I know I can converse differently with people than what I have before. And if you're in that part of life or that flow of life where you want to get better at everything that you do and you want to improve, podcasting definitely was my medium that helped me become a better all around person. And you're right, it does put you in different circles. And when you meet these different people, you get different ideas, you get a different way of looking at life, a different perspective. You get open to uh, possibilities that come your way. So, as we come to a
So
close, what?
I was going to ask you really quickly,
Go ahead.
what is something that you really changed your mind on because of talking to someone on a podcast? And what you're thinking, I'll tell you really quickly. I've become much more open to the fact that I had a pretty nice upbringing, and all my struggles were self-imposed. Well, I don't know where
Mm,
it came from, but pretty much all through sports. And I think I used to have a lot less sympathy for people that they do bad things in life, they end up incarcerated. I used to have zero sympathy for those kind of people. I was like, they're a menace to society, you know,
mhm,
capital punishment, lock them away for life. I don't care. And now I'm much more. Um, I've talked to a few people. I talked to someone who was in prison for a long time, and now he does all these wonderful things. And I've become a lot more open to giving people second chances and being a bit more cognizant of the fact that if you grew up and your dad's in jail and your mom's a drunk and you have multiple siblings and you barely have any money, no support, no family, it's going to be, I can't put myself in that situation and say, yeah, I would have risen above it and still been a success. I can't say that. I hope I would have, but I can't say that. And so it's given me a lot more compassion by having those kind of conversations. That's one that
Mm.
I've really I've changed my mind a lot on. I just have a different way of seeing things in the last maybe 18 months. That's been a big one for me.
Mm. Podcasting for me, uh, so your question was, what's the
Like, is there
one
something you've kind of changed your mind about because of several conversations, maybe really
changed
powerful
my mind about?
conversations you've had?
Yeah, I mean, I think very similar to you is it opened my eyes to other possibilities. I had a very close-minded perspective of things that life had to go this way, or I thought, well, this is how it always is. This is how people are supposed to do things, where you put outcomes into a box. And through podcasting, and so if you met, I've met amazing people. I've talked to a lot of authors and I've talked to a lot of coaches. That's where the gravitation seems to be for that. Those people, although I've talked to a lot of different other people as well, but I have a higher percentage of coaches and authors. And what's opened my eyes is diving into who they are as people and learning about what they've done and realizing. I think the biggest thing for me was realizing there is just a whole big world out there that I have no idea what it's about and no clue. And it feeds my curiosity to just
I love
go
that.
and just learn more and realize that the way I do things is not the only way to do things. So I think that's what's changed me a lot. So,
Yeah, it's given you a bigger lens to see life, which I
sure.
think is really important.
Yep. Absolutely, 100%. Well, Lawrence, this has been a lot of fun. I'm so glad you had the time for us to chat together. And well, you know what? I'm going to close with the question that I always close with. What's one small step that someone can do today to help them change their tomorrow?
I've been thinking a lot about this quote, and it said, I think it's, I don't think they know who said it. A healthy man wants 1,000 things, and a sick man just one. So it kind of brings you back to if you're really sick, you don't care about anything else but getting better. And then as soon as you're well, you have all these hopes and dreams and desires and wants and needs. And so I think for anyone, one small step is there's infinite things we can do to change our physical bearing the world, whether it's working out and getting a bit fitter or making some awkward phone calls to try and get a new job you want, or all these different things to improve your actual situation in life. But I think the easiest thing to do is try to think, instead of focusing on what you want, try to focus on what you have. And if you live in the West, if you live in a country with opportunity and you're relatively healthy, that's a huge win in my book. So just trying to be a bit more appreciative, I think that will make you so much happier, because for the longest time, I always focused on, if I can just get X and Y, then I'll be so happy. And now I realize that, hey, I'm still chasing my dreams. I'm still chasing my goals, but I'm going to enjoy every step along the way, because once you get them, best case scenario, you do get them, it's over. Like, a lot of the time you
Right.
actually have a come down when you achieve a really big goal. So you have to, I know it's a cliche, but enjoying the journey of life and enjoying the journey of striving to your goals is just like surfing a beautiful wave. You don't want to wait till it's over and say that was awesome. You want to enjoy every second. So I think
Yeah.
that's a small step that people can do. And it doesn't require a massive change in your life. It's just a little change in
Right.
perspective and how you see the world.
Being present, which is a common thread in your life is just being present. I love it. Your book, let's close with our books and let's plug our own books.
I love it.
So,
Um,
what's the title of your book and who's it for?
Available on Amazon. It's called The Forgotten Asset Class, and it's about low risk, high yield real estate investing. And it's for anyone who just wants to learn a bit more about money and the financial system and different assets. And listen, you can invest in real estate, you can invest in stocks, you can invest in precious watches or precious art. There's a million different things you can invest in, but just trying to find something that works out for you, and just invest, do something today that your future self will be happy for, because everybody except for the uber rich, they're just feeling this crazy inflation. And I think we're going to be in times where things seem like they're just going to keep getting more expensive, and it's just going to be harder and harder for families to keep that same standard of living on fixed salaries unless you get a bit more knowledge and you try to invest in yourself and do things, play the game. And I think it's I've had a couple of people had one person say to me, hey, you motivated my parents to they were going to sell this second property they have, and they decided to keep it and get tenants in there, and it's their first rental. And thank you so much. Like, I hear these random stories. And even if it's just more awareness for the fact that every day the purchasing power of the dollars you have goes down over time. So try to make some steps to prepare for that. But yeah, it's been such a pleasure to write. And I think just getting the habit of reading is so important, because it's a habit that I lost. And it's so easy to look at get all these little dopamine hits from these little things on Twitter and these little tiny little online articles, but actually spending time with your phone on silent or in the other room and reading old school paper books has been something I've been doing more and more of, and it's been giving me so much happiness.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I have to get a copy of your book, so I apologize. I haven't done that yet. The Forgotten Asset Class.
I'll send you one. I'll send you one too.
Honestly, actually, it sounds really fascinating because I've been in the financial space. I've studied real estate and, all the different ways that you can create income for yourself. So I'm actually very interested in that, and high yield, low risk in real estate sounds appealing to me. So I do have to get a copy of your book. My book is Small Step. What's that?
Yeah, I was going to say, let's plug you now.
Yeah. So my book is called Small Steps, Big Wins, and it's taking your challenges and traumas and turning them into triumphs and wins, So it's like I said before, it was an autobiographical self-help book, but I wrote it walking through a number of traumatic events that I had and what I did to walk through them, get to the other side of them, and, the tips and tricks that I had along the way. So filled with a lot of practical application, which I tend to gravitate to. And the one thing that I really thought was unique about my book is that at the end of every chapter, there are reflections and actions. And at the end of every chapter, there are QR codes to point readers towards podcasts that pertain to the chapter that they just read, whether it was from my podcast or from my coach's podcast. Austin Linney is my coach, and Construct Your Life is his podcast. Small Steps, Big Wins is my podcast, and your podcast is, go ahead, I'll let you plug it.
Answer the line hard. Thank you so much. And Sue, I'll just say this, that title you have, Small Steps, Big Wins, I think it's such a refreshing one, because I think one of the problems people see is they have these big goals and dreams, and they can't imagine going from step 1 to step 70 or whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And I really think the secret of success is just moving a tiny bit every day, a little bit further along the path of the journey you want to get to. So I really, that title of your podcast and your book, it really resonates with me. And I think it's a really good message to share.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, Lawrence, I appreciate you. Thank you for the gift of your time. This has been a lot of fun.
Likewise. Thank you for having me, Sue.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I value your time with me, and I seek to make every moment count. In order to make lasting change in your life, listening is usually not enough. So I want to ask you, what practical steps are you going to put into action today as a result of listening to this podcast? Remember, any step, any action, no matter how small, starts your journey to a big win. And if you're not sure where to get started, reach out to me and let's have a conversation. Until next time, love yourself, then love others. Peace.